Hey guys, so recently I made a video talking about, the quote-unquote renaissance of competitive TF2 and how in a lot of ways I see the scene as more stable and more future-proof than it has been in the past, as well as like better beginner resources and things like that. And obviously I'm going to get a bunch of comments disagreeing. Many of which I don't even know if they watch the video or not, because then they're talking about, oh god, I hope not, I don't want them to ruin my weapons again, yada yada. The whole, what you'd expect being in there. But there was a lot of valid points being made. And one of which actually was about player retention and making the argument that player retention is actually really bad, because especially like this season of Invite, quite a few teams have died, so it's actually a small, like the smallest invite it maybe ever has been. And historically Advanced has had a very difficult time finding enough teams as well. So these top two divisions struggle a lot with getting like teams, basically, which they were arguing was indicative of poor player retention. Now, I kind of disagree, but I'm going to get to the point later. I actually did quickly reply to this comment. I don't make a habit of replying, but I recognize the person from being around in like Twitch chat and whatnot. So yeah, that's something I want to talk about, is at this higher skill level, actually getting players to play the game. Because there's a lot of factors involved here. Now, for starters, the actual... I don't think that there is a particularly strong correlation between team sizes and the overall health of the scene, or the overall involvement of these higher div players. Because usually players at these divisions, you have to spend years playing to get there, more often than not. So that's representing someone who has been involved in the community or the scene for multiple years, and that almost always indicates someone who has made pretty strong social connections to the competitive TF2 community. So very often these people are definitely participants, and sometimes active participants in the community. It's just not reflected in the actual, stats of the league, because they're not actively competing. I actually am included in that measure. I'm not playing this season, but still very much involved, still hanging out with my friends who are playing this season, cheering them on in Twitch chat, still trying to cast when I can, still making videos, things like that. So there's definitely a level of involvement and kind of community health that is not being represented by actual league statistics, in my opinion. Now, that being said, I do think there can be a kind of burnout problem, or at the very least, it's really hard to expect players to be playing season after season after season, back to back to back, because that grind, it's a grind. It's hard for quite a few reasons. So one of the big ones is that overall the higher divs, they're going to be a little bit older, like demographically. Because if you assume the average player starts out in newcomer / amateur, that average player is going to have an average, age. And then if it takes them multiple years to get to, high advanced or invite, for example, then you're expecting that, demographic to, on average, be a couple of years higher. Really quick and dirty kind of logic here. But overall, I do think that, people obviously get older with time, and they get better with time, so it tends to be older players on average in these higher divisions. So there's obviously real life obligations start to come up a bit, and especially since TF2 doesn't pay the bills. When you're an adult with bills, then you don't necessarily have all the same free time. On top of the fact that, after multiple years, you might have achieved all you really set out to achieve in the game as well. Not everyone is going to be trying to win invite. In fact, I think the vast majority of players don't have ambitions to be grinding into an invite win, and that's totally fine. I don't think there should be an expectation that people kind of perpetually grind and try and get better ad nauseum. There is a certain point in which you kind of achieve what you set out to do. So yeah, there's a few examples in which the drive to compete is going to be a little harder to keep up with, or rather might not be worth it necessarily for players in those higher divs. Now, that being said, the kind of burnout problem I was talking about, I do think that the actual structure of the league, RGL, does make it so it's very hard to keep up with and can easily burn out players. This is something I've talked about in the forums and shared my opinion on this very frequently. But we'll introduce how the league is actually structured here, and I'll take a sip of water. So you have 3 seasons a year. These seasons last typically like 3 months with 1 month of off season, generally speaking. Trying to think. It's usually like 8 weeks of actual regular season, and then playoffs and whatnot. Yeah, so you typically have whatever. There's 3 seasons a year is all you need to know. And these seasons go quick, honestly. So quick, in fact, that if you are on a really strong team making playoffs and making a deep run into playoffs, then good luck for next season, because your options are going to be very limited for finding a team if you don't just move up a div or continue playing in the same div with the team that you're currently on, because that playoffs is going to run pretty deep into the off season, and in some cases, if matches get rescheduled and things, teams kind of get figured out and fill out their rosters before you're even done. So they can run pretty close to each other. Now, there's definitely still like a coherent off season where teams kind of get to adjust, figure out how they like to play with each other and whatnot. But the seasons kind of run back to back to back to back to back, just going on and on. And that is it's tough to keep up with. So it's no surprise that a lot of players are not playing every single season, especially at a high level. When I was in intermediate and main, I played like 3 seasons in a row and then stopped after winning main. I don't think I have played 2 seasons in a row since then, because it's just a lot, a lot to handle. The time commitment is huge. And this is something I talked about when my video about competitive TF2, why it's not an esport. One of the problems with the accessibility that I talk about is that it's a big time commitment. It's a huge time commitment if you're on a team, because you're expecting to scrim multiple days a week. But even if you just want to kind of pick up like the game and play in like a pickup game or a pug, that's still like at least a 40-minute investment if you include the time like waiting for the pug to start. Usually that's a lot of time that needs to be dedicated. So playing for a team is definitely a big commitment, and I think that serves as a really large barrier of entry for players, both new and returning, because if something is going on in your personal life where you might not have access to as much time or as much free time, then that area to entry seems a lot bigger, and it's a lot more difficult to justify playing a TF2 season, especially an invite TF2 season, in which you're like a good team that needs to like grind to kind of keep up, or you have prospects. That's a huge time investment, and obviously not everyone is going to have the time for that. But on top of that, I do think an issue is that any season is kind of just another season. There are LAN seasons that I think are starting to get introduced now. In fact, last season was a LAN season, in that invite playoffs was played at LAN, and that's certainly going to attract people and is a very nice thing. However, for your average season, like for example season 16 that we're in right now, what is drawing people to this season in particular? If you are kind of not feeling it for whatever reason, or you don't have as much time to justify it, what is enticing you to this season in particular? And the answer is really not that much. Because again, it's kind of just another season, and there's going to be one in a few months anyway, that if you want to play then, you can just play then. So it's very easy to justify not playing. And so a lot of higher div players that are still involved in the community and still doing things here and there, but not necessarily having the same drive, or they just don't see a team that they like, or any number of things, don't have as much time as they did in the past. Any of these things can really become deal breakers if the time investment is too high. So that being said, what are the solutions that I think are good? Well, one solution is just shorter seasons. Just make the barrier to entry smaller, which is definitely controversial. This was something that I was actually tested out the season that I got second in advanced. They tried a 4-week season, and my teammates and I really loved it, because even like by the end of us, like not even like macro burnout, but even just like burnout over the course of a season, by the end, like it can be rough because you're just putting in so much time, where you're kind of ready to be done. Obviously, like if you're a playoffs team, then playoffs is going to be very exciting to you and, a motivating factor. But, by the end of those 4 weeks, we were like, okay, yeah, no, we're very ready to like be playing playoffs right now and kind of wrapping things up. This was not the case for everyone, and I know plenty of other teams in the division that particular season really didn't like this format because they felt like, paying league fees or whatever, they should have more matches, or at least like it should feel more worth it. Obviously, going to be differing opinions on that front, but I do think looking at the issue as just the sheer time investment is going to contribute somewhat to the conversation. But the other big thing I thought was an issue is just the season to season, just unending march, because they all kind of blend together at a certain point. But I do think that splitting that up would really help things, because if you have, for example, 3 seasons a year, right? Let's say, for example, man, I'm trying to think now. It's not 4, is it? I'm pretty sure it's just 3 seasons a year. Maybe it is 4. Whatever. Who cares? Point being, if you have that season-long chunk of a few months, and you don't run a season during that, and you just have nothing but downtime, well, it might seem like, you're just killing things off. But I think it actually benefits the scene in a few ways. So, for starters, you are freeing up so much manpower and so much interest as well in order to host and run other things. For example, players love to talk about how much they want to play cups. And when I say a cup, I just mean like a small scale tournament that's run, a week or oftentimes a weekend. That's, again, just very low commitment, low effort. And because it's a much lower barrier of entry, it can usually attract more players. And on top of that, what I think cups do well is that overall, especially at a high level, TF2 gets very, very circle jerky in a sense, where you're going to have a tough time finding a team if you don't already know someone. You either need to be so much better than everyone in your current div to like move up and find a new team, or you need to move up like with a group of people or at least have social connections. That's just kind of how it is. And a lot of the time when you see teams at these high levels, it's groups of friends who have played together multiple seasons in a row, and they don't usually play at all if they're not playing together. And I think that cups tend to, or would, split this up a little bit, because while I might not want to lock in for 8 weeks plus potential playoffs with someone that I don't actually like playing with, and like run a risk of that or something like that, for a cup, if it's just a weekend, then really who cares? And I think teams would be more willing to play with more people, and there would be more kind of cross-contamination. More, it'd be more of a melting pot, and people would have an easier time finding teams in the regular season because some of this cross-contamination has happened during these low-stakes cups. So I do think that would be a good way to kind of reduce the circle jerkiness of what teams are like in the very highest divisions. But on top of that, it's just going to attract more people because the barrier to entry is so much lower for a weekend cup than it would be for an entire full season. But on top of that, not having the season means that all the people that want to play, of which there are many, and there are people that get the urge to play even during seasons that aren't on teams, would very much drive cups happening. It would drive pugs to be much more active. And I do think it would renew a kind of, competitive drive in players that maybe have a competitive drive kind of squashed out a little bit by, just the endless march of season after season. The seasons would also start to stick out a bit more because if you have to play, if you're just playing pugs in the occasional cup here and there, for this entire off season, then you're going to be looking forward to that full season and maybe a little more excited to play it. So I do think that kind of breaking up that march of just endless seasons being ran back to back would definitely, in the downtime, drive other events happening. And these other events, I think, could be useful and healthy for the scene in multiple different ways, as I've talked about. But on top of that, I do think that this kind of off time would renew a kind of competitive drive in a lot of people who, currently don't really have it, or at least don't really see the point necessarily if they have to lock in for the 8 weeks to do whatever. So overall, I do think the criticism of player retention maybe I don't know if that's super valid in the sense that these players are still kind of involved in the scene, but for whatever reason, people are going to be playing or not playing for their own personal reasons and whatnot. But I do think burnout is definitely a thing that the current league structure in some ways kind of encourages, or at least doesn't really protect against. And I think you can do plenty of things to prevent that, and also, make playing competitive TF2 more interesting in other ways as well by having more cups, having more of these non-league events that, again, the manpower is going to be freed up to do because, whatever admins are volunteering to run the league are now completely free because, they don't have to do that. So I do think it would be overall good for competitive TF2. Sixes specifically. I'm talking about sixes here. Although a lot of the same would apply to Highlander, I'm sure. But anyway, that's all I have on this topic about, player retention and whatnot at that highest level. I guess I am, one of those people who aren't playing a season, and I don't really have plans to in the immediate future, but still very much involved in the scene nonetheless. But anyway, hope you guys enjoyed, and I'll see you all next time.